Wow, there was a really compelling moment that happened at the tail end of questioning by Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, a Democrat. He was asking questions of John Dean, who was Richard Nixon's White House counsel, and John Dean said something really compelling. I want to bring Francey Hakes into the conversation. She's an attorney who joins us regularly here on the Law and Crime Network. Francey, good to see you again.
You too, Aaron. Thanks for having me.
I'm assuming that you keyed in on what John Dean said there. He said that at his core, despite all of his legal issues, that at his core, Richard Nixon had some respect for the rule of law and that Donald Trump, the current president, does not. I'm guessing you keyed in on that as well. What did you make of it?
Well, Aaron, the first thing I noticed, of course, is that what on earth does this have to do with Brett Kavanaugh and his qualifications for the Supreme Court? I think that this was Senator Blumenthal's way of bringing in the current political issues of the day, and that anonymous op-ed that was published in the New York Times accusing President Trump of being mercurial and making poor decisions, and his staff trying to thwart his will, which is actually the will of the voters as well, and bringing that into the Supreme Court hearings so that Blumenthal can have his moment on that political posture. But I don't think that it has much to do with anything, and I don't know whether John Dean is right, whether President Trump respects the rule of law. I think it's easy to say that he certainly has problems with the law, and he certainly has railed against certain areas of the law and even his own attorney general. So those things are very controversial.
Well, look, I mean, it has something to do with Brett Kavanaugh, because Kavanaugh has gone on the record and made statements about expanded presidential power, whether or not the president can be subjected to certain investigations while he's in office. So if that's the case, then doesn't this all dovetail together?
Well, I mean, I think that's the point Blumenthal is certainly trying to make. And what Brett Kavanaugh thinks about presidential power is important. And I think we can glean an awful lot about what he thinks of presidential power through his opinions and through some of the questions that he's answered here. But I think he's got a point, Judge Kavanaugh does, with respect to presidential power and investigations, and more importantly, indictments and impeachment, and the distinction between all those things.
Yeah, we need to take a quick break here, Francey. We're going to be back with more live coverage of the confirmation hearing of Brett Kavanaugh in a moment. Welcome back to Law and Crime, folks. We're going to go straight back into the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator John Kennedy, a Republican from Louisiana, was on the sitting in the moderator's seat there. They did wrap up. We thought they were going to. I thought they might go for a couple more seconds, but they ended very, very quickly there. Some really stinging moments there while we were in the break. Senator Kennedy looking at John Dean, who was Richard Nixon's White House attorney, and said he hurt the country and only did the right thing when he was, quote, cornered like a rat. So this thing got into some harsh, stinging language. Francey Hakes still with us on the line here, former federal prosecutor, scoring more political points. The Republicans really trying to back John Dean into the corner, but he did kind of shovel it right back up onto the panel of senators there.
Well, he did. That was an interesting exchange, Aaron, because, of course, people probably won't remember that John Dean was in the White House counsel's office, that he pled guilty to obstructing justice in the Watergate investigation, that he himself admitted paying the Watergate burglars the hush money to try to engage the cover-up. So his hands certainly aren't clean, and I don't really blame Senator Kennedy for saying that he doesn't find John Dean a credible witness. I think all he was trying to do is what any good prosecutor would, and that is discredit the defense witness. And so that's what I think he was doing.
Yeah, I mean, this really sort of sounded like I was listening back into the Watergate hearings again for the last half hour here. At first I took you to task, what does this have to do with Brett Kavanaugh? But I'm also sitting here now thinking, okay, now that this just sort of spun into an attack on the witness, what does it have to do with Brett Kavanaugh? Is this about Brett Kavanaugh, or is this about going and watching Republicans trying to distance themselves from Richard Nixon and Democrats trying to raise the scepter of Richard Nixon yet again? Richard Nixon's been dead for quite some time.
Well, he has, and he's been out of the presidency for even longer.
Yeah.
I don't know, Aaron, who called John Dean as a witness, but I find it hard to believe it was the Republicans here. I suspect it was the Democrats, and I think they're trying to raise the specter of Watergate. They're trying to say that this president believes that he's above the law and is going to end up exactly where, or should end up exactly where Richard Nixon did, which is the threat of impeachment and a begging by his own party to resign. And so I think that's what the Democrats are trying to put in people's minds in order to create a cloud over the presidency and especially a cloud over Brett Kavanaugh's nomination.
Well, look, this has gotten very interesting in the last minute here today. Some stinging language coming from the senators on the panel, asking some stinging questions of witnesses sitting on the witness panel. Look, this hearing has gone through a number of topics, a gamut of topics. We've been talking about Watergate. We've been talking about presidential powers. We've been talking about administrative agencies. But a lot of people are saying the real hot potato in the room is Roe versus Wade. We listened to some testimony about this morning. Alicia Baker was one of those speaking. Let's listen to her.
What happens to those?
Interesting testimony there from a member of the clergy who is speaking about access to birth control, reproductive rights. Francey, this is not exactly the sort of lockstep verbiage that we normally hear from people in religious positions on these issues. But I think it points that the religious community in this country is a lot more diverse than sometimes we think it might be based on what we hear in popular culture.
Well, Aaron, I think that you are really getting me on some hot button political issues today. When it comes to religion and the law, it's just such a divisive topic. I mean, you look at the Pope, for example, who's come out in recent weeks and been derided for his reaction to the scandals in the church about clergy sexual abuse. But many people say that he's actually a, quote, left-wing Pope on environmental issues and other things. When it comes to this particular witness before the committee, she was certainly saying that she felt, and I wrote down the quote specifically, Judge Kavanaugh would, if he was put on the court, access to affordable birth control will be in jeopardy. That is melodrama, in my opinion, access to affordable birth control. People talk about this issue as though it is the end-all, be-all issue above anything else. And I think reasonable people can differ on whether or not religious employers like nuns, the Catholic Church, should be forced to pay for birth control when it is against their religion. That is ultimately, I think, what's the topic under discussion. Now, what she's saying is that employers should be forced to do it, and that to allow them not to do it violates the tenets of separating church and state. I don't think her argument makes a lot of sense to me.
I mean, logically, it's a tough argument because, if you believe in religious freedom, that as a religious employer, you ought to be able to follow the tenets of your religion without having government interference in that. I think that that's the argument that the courts have had to make recently, and indeed they have made that argument in the hot button cases that we've seen go before the court. As to say that it's affordable birth control, well, who is it affordable for? Is it affordable in the off-the-counter price, or is it affordable because someone else is helping you pay it? That seems to be the root of the issue, more accurately stated.
Well, that's absolutely true. And I think it's just one of those things that when it comes to a Supreme Court justice and whether or not he's going to rule on the affordability of birth control, I think is probably unlikely. I think he's much more likely to rule on whether institutions have to pay for birth control for employees.
Yes, that frames the issue up legally. So we've gotten to the bottom of that. So look, we need to take another quick break here on the Law and Crime Network. We're going to be back with more of our continuing coverage of the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearings here when we return. Welcome back to Law and Crime, folks. The intersection between politics and law is at the forefront of national discussion today in more ways than one. The Kavanaugh confirmation hearings, of course, is one way. We've been covering them here on Law and Crime. But right now in federal court is a sentencing hearing for a member of the Trump campaign, George Papadopoulos. He is being sentenced. He just told the judge that he made a dreadful mistake in misleading federal authorities. He said that the investigation into what went on in the 2016 election that is being run by Special Counsel Robert Mueller sends signals global implications, and that truth in this investigation matters. The judge just moments ago took a 15-minute break to go and decide the sentence for that former Trump campaign staffer. Now, we here at the Law and Crime Network, through investigative reporter Brian Ross, have obtained video of George Papadopoulos' courthouse marriage. Of course, his wife went public not too long ago and publicly asked President Trump to pardon her husband, President Trump's former campaign staffer, of any charge he may be convicted of. He, of course, pleaded guilty, but whatever his sentence may be, his wife asked for clemency from President Trump. Let's look at that exclusive footage that we obtained here at Law and Crime.
It is with that honor, having shown your willingness to become husband and wife by the power vested in me by the Constitution, the statutes of the state of Illinois, I now pronounce you husband and wife. May your lives together be long and happy. With all best wishes, I congratulate you. I wish you good luck and all the blessings your hearts may hold. Sir, you may kiss your bride.
Thank you so much. Beautiful.
All right, George Papadopoulos there with his wife in a courthouse wedding. They wed while he was working on the campaign. Bottom line here, he admitted to lying to FBI agents and is in the process of being sentenced as we speak. The wife, who, of course, you saw in the wedding video, has asked President Trump to pardon George Papadopoulos, her new husband. That reporting from investigative correspondent Brian Ross here at the Law and Crime Network. We're going to go back, though, now to the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearings. We're going to listen to some of the previous testimony from earlier today. Some really critical witnesses making some very powerful points. We heard there from an attorney who represented a teen who was seeking an abortion and how Judge Kavanaugh's decisions influenced that teen's life. Francey Hakes, I know that it's tough to get hit with a question that crosses politics and law. Here, this was certainly an emotional account of what happened in that teen's life. It's one thing to feel empathy. It's another thing to discuss what happened legally in the case. And I certainly don't think that this was in any way a law school textbook analysis of the legal issues that Judge Kavanaugh had to grapple with in this case.
No, Aaron, and I actually watched Judge Kavanaugh discuss this very case and his ruling in this case yesterday. So I'm at least a little familiar with what he said about it. And first, I want to say that what I think maybe your viewers might not have seen or heard is that that Jane in this case was a child. She was 17 years old, and federal law recognizes that that is a child. She can't buy a gun. She can't drink alcohol. She can't vote. And yet what this attorney was advocating is that she, on her own, without her parents, because she was in this country without her parents, should be allowed to make a major life decision, a major medical decision, without consulting with some kind of trusted adult, a family member or otherwise, someone who could counsel her. And so Judge Kavanaugh said that his ruling merely required the government to find someone like that could counsel Jane when she's 17 years old, making this major life, major medical decision before she went through with it. And that's what he ruled, and that's what happened. And as you heard from her attorney, she went through the abortion. The government did not prevent her from obtaining the abortion that she and whoever counseled her decided that she should have.
The argument here that we heard from the attorney is that this just resulted in a delay of what the teen wanted, but I'm trying to remember my abortion precedent here, and you might know the case off the tip of your tongue, and I'm struggling to come up with it. But in the case of a minor, isn't either parental notification or some kind of judicial stamp of approval what the Supreme Court said needs to happen in cases like this? Or am I completely misremembering what it's been years since I've read?
Yeah, no, it's been years for me too, Aaron. I mean, I'm a criminal lawyer, but memory serves, every state has different rules and regulations, right? That's part of federalism in this country. And so many states have restrictions that other states don't have. And some of those restrictions are on when or at what period a minor can get an abortion with or without parental consent. And sometimes they can do it without parental consent. Remember, it's a major medical procedure. Mm-hmm. You can't pull a child's tooth without parental permission. And they can get a major medical procedure either with parental consent, or if they go to a judge, they can can waive that parental consent if there's some reason to. And sometimes the parent may be the father of that child. There may be an incest, a criminal incest situation. And so we want children to be able to seek help from the judicial branch when they need it. And that is apparently what happened here.
Yeah, that's my understanding of it as well. And look, I mean, these hot button issues are the sorts of issues where I encourage everyone, before you form an opinion, pick up the case law and read it. Start with the statute, read the case law, then form an opinion, because it's hard to really dig into some of these issues just with the sound bites. And look, I'm delivering information here. I think that hearing from people who are involved in these cases is highly valuable, but it's not the complete picture. Pick up the document, read it if you want to learn more. Look, we're going to continue on with our coverage of the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearing, rather. We're going to dial back to some earlier testimony from today. This is Senator Harris, a Democrat from California, asking questions of a witness. A lot of the testimony earlier today in the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearing surrounded this issue of access to abortion. Of course, the U.S. Supreme Court has examined the issue time and time again. The right itself has been held to be a fundamental right rooted in the nature of privacy and liberty under the Constitution, but it's been challenged. We had Roe v. Wade that set the original right. Planned Parenthood versus Casey was the case that Republicans at one point hoped would overturn Roe. Justice David Souter was the new vote on the court. They thought he might flip the precedent, but he ultimately didn't, and that earned him the unending scorn of a number of conservative Republicans. Justice Souter, a native of New Hampshire, where I lived for a number of years, is famous there locally for his legal acumen, but here he didn't flip the precedent, and we're hearing all the nuances in the abortion precedent that the U.S. Supreme Court has set since then. Francey Hakes. Of course, the law doesn't stand still. It's possible that another judge could turn around and flip the precedent. You're shaking your head, though. Was that because you disagree that Kavanaugh would do it, or because you're agreeing that the law doesn't stand still?
No, I agree, Aaron. The law really doesn't stand still. You know, everyone, it depends on which political party you're with, whether or not you're in favor of overturning certain precedent. For example, right now, the left, the Democrats, want to have Kavanaugh assure them that he will not vote to overturn Roe versus Wade. But I guarantee you they would want him to overturn Citizens United, which was a First Amendment political contributions case that has been very controversial, that was decided by the Republican majority on the court or the conservative majority on the court. So I think it's one of those questions where it just sort of depends on where you stand, whether you want precedent to be honored or overturned.
Yeah, look, this can change and change and change. We're going to be back after a quick break here on Law and Crime. Welcome back to Law and Crime, folks. Breaking news off the top. George Papadopoulos, former member of President Trump's campaign, sentenced just now to 14 days in jail for lying to federal authorities. Papadopoulos was a former policy advisor to the Trump campaign. You're looking at wedding photos. He met his now wife while he was working on the campaign and wed her in a courthouse ceremony in Chicago. Brian Ross of the Law and Crime Network investigated this case. He obtained the photos. They are indeed exclusive to Law and Crime. Why are they relevant? Well, the wife has said publicly that she wants President Trump to pardon her husband of the offense of lying to the FBI about the significance of her husband's contacts in the 2016 election regarding U.S.-Russia relations and the Trump campaign. Now, how did it all unravel? Allegedly, Papadopoulos had contact with a professor who said that Russia had incriminating emails, embarrassing emails related to Hillary Clinton. Does this have to do with Hillary Clinton's server? Does it have to do with an alleged DNC hack? In other words, a hack on the Democratic National Committee. All of this spinning together in the Papadopoulos case. He admitted to lying to the FBI about what he knew while he was working on the campaign. That resulted again today to a sentence of 14 days in jail. This conversation is blowing up on social media right now, but that decision came down just seconds ago. We wanted to let you know right away that that is what the judge's sentence was for George Papadopoulos. The question now, will President Trump take up the wife's suggestion, requests, and actually issue some kind of a pardon? And if so, when will it happen? That appears to be the possible next step that we will be watching for here on Law and Crime. Let's dial back now to the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearing, which wrapped up a little while ago here on Law and Crime. Our live coverage continuing from Washington, D.C. We're going to dial back now to Jackson Corbin, who broadened the discussion out to Judge Kavanaugh's possible role, if he is selected to sit on the U.S. Supreme Court, in areas of health care. A powerful statement from a young man in Washington, D.C. about the Affordable Care Act and how it's affected both his life and the life of his family. Francey Hakes is an attorney, former federal prosecutor. She's with us here on the Law and Crime Network. You know, it's hard to listen to that and not be moved in some respect, but it is certainly a request for a specific type of judge, of members of that Judiciary Committee. Do you think it had much of an effect?
Well, listen, Aaron, anytime a young boy like that comes in front of Congress and speaks well and pulls at your heartstrings, you can't help but be moved. But I think what this points out to me is the very different judicial philosophies between liberals and conservatives in this country. Liberals want judges to show empathy and to have empathy for the people who come before them. Conservatives believe that justice is blind and that you have to rule based on the law and the Constitution and not on empathy. And I think that this little boy Jackson's testimony was designed for one purpose, and that's to pull on people's heartstrings. And of course, you'd have to be a cold-hearted monster not to believe that the child had a very sympathetic story and was very sympathetic himself. But he's 13 years old. He doesn't understand politics and policy and the impact of different laws on the Constitution and on the taxes. And there's so many, it's such a complicated issue. So I actually have a problem with the Democrats bringing a 13-year-old boy with a medical condition as, I think, a puppet for their point of view. How would they feel if in front of Justice Elena Kagan, they had brought a child whose parent had been killed by an illegal alien and said that and tugged at the heartstrings? People would have been angry about that too. So I think this seems a little below the belt to me.
Well, I mean, I can see that argument as well. I think that you have to take that argument with the broader context of what you said. What you said certainly can't be snipped up, because there's an empathy element and then there's a reality element of it. But look, we're going to wrap up our coverage there and leave that thought as it sits. Francey Hakes, former federal prosecutor, great to see you again on Law and Crime.
Thanks, Aaron.
Okay, it's the end of the broadcast day and the end of the broadcast week for us here at Law and Crime. We have been bringing you live coverage of the Liggins case from Iowa. That will pick up again next week, as well as the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings. That is it for us, though, now. It's been great to join you this week. It's been an important week. We will be back with more live coverage on Monday. Have a good weekend.